If you want to understand why type 2 diabetes has become the defining health crisis of the modern age, don't look at sugar intake alone. Don't look at sedentary lifestyle. Look at what's been quietly growing in backyards, in traditional kitchens, in the forgotten corners of ancient medicine for thousands of years, and what your grocery store has completely failed to put in front of you. Here's a number that should make you pause. By the time the average person receives a type 2 diabetes diagnosis, they have already lost between 40 and 60% of their functional beta cell mass. The cells responsible for producing insulin gone, damaged, silenced before anyone even had a conversation about blood sugar. And the conventional response to that loss is to manage what remains with medication, to work around the dysfunction rather than address it. Hi, I'm Dr. Leana. I'm an emergency medicine physician and metabolic disease researcher. And after more than 15 years watching patients come through with diabetic complications, neuropathy, kidney failure, cardiovascular events, I became obsessed with one question. Not how do we manage this disease better, but why are some people actually reversing it? Not controlling it, reversing it. And what I found led me to a leaf. A forgotten, inexpensive, widely available leaf that the research now shows does something extraordinary to pancreatic tissue, to insulin sensitivity, and to blood glucose regulation. Something most people have never heard from their doctors. Something that starts working in the first 72 hours and produces measurable clinical changes within 14 days. Most people with type 2 diabetes have been told the same story. Your blood sugar is too high. Your body doesn't respond to insulin the way it should. You need to reduce carbohydrates, lose weight, exercise more, and if that isn't enough, here is metformin. Here is a GLP-1 agonist. Here is a sulfonylurea to push your pancreas harder. And if you're lucky, you manage the numbers. You keep the A1C below 7. You avoid the worst complications. But you never actually get better. The disease just sits there, managed, monitored, waiting. After nearly 15 years in emergency medicine and deep inside the metabolic research literature, I've come to understand something that quietly contradicts that entire framework. Type 2 diabetes is not primarily a glucose problem. Glucose is the symptom. The root issue is a failure at the cellular level, specifically in the beta cells of the pancreas, and in the mitochondrial function of muscle and liver tissue that begins years, sometimes decades, before a diagnosis is ever made. Think of your pancreas as a factory with two divisions. One division, the alpha cells, manages glucagon, the hormone that raises blood sugar when you need energy. The other division, the beta cells, manages insulin, the hormone that clears glucose from the bloodstream and delivers it to cells that need fuel. In a healthy factory, these two divisions communicate constantly, perfectly calibrated. But in the years leading to type 2 diabetes, something starts disrupting that communication. Inflammatory signals accumulate. Fat deposits, specifically ceramide lipids, begin infiltrating the beta cell membranes. Oxidative stress builds inside the mitochondria that power those cells. And gradually, the factory starts losing workers. Beta cells either become dysfunctional or they undergo apoptosis, programmed cell death. By the time your fasting glucose reads 126 on a lab report, that factory has been struggling for years. The conventional treatment responds by pushing the remaining workers harder or by hiring pharmaceutical managers to compensate for what the factory can no longer do naturally. What it almost never does is ask, can we rebuild the factory itself? Can we reduce the inflammation, clear the ceramide lipids, restore the mitochondrial function, and give those beta cells the biological environment they need to regenerate? That is the question the conventional model fails to answer. And that is precisely what the research on this forgotten leaf is beginning to answer in remarkable ways. The leaf is Moringa, Moringa oleifera. And the one thing at the center of the most promising metabolic research most Western patients have never encountered, most Western doctors have never discussed, is sitting in specialty grocers, in online supplement retailers, in traditional markets around the world for almost nothing. In countries where moringa has remained part of the daily dietary tradition, parts of India, the Philippines, sub-Saharan Africa, Central America, type 2 diabetes rates tell a different story than in populations that abandon traditional plant-based dietary patterns for processed food frameworks. In the Philippines, where moringa, called malunggay, appears in traditional daily meals, rural communities maintaining traditional dietary patterns show metabolic profiles dramatically different from urban populations that have adopted Western dietary norms. The contrast is not genetic. The genetics haven't changed. The diet has. What moringa does at the cellular level is not folklore. It is peer-reviewed, mechanistically documented biology. And what makes it different from every other plant compound that gets called a superfood and forgotten is this. Moringa doesn't just support glucose metabolism around the edges. The research suggests it targets the root biological failures that drive beta cell dysfunction, inflammation, oxidative damage, ceramide accumulation, and mitochondrial inefficiency simultaneously through multiple distinct pathways. The first mechanism is isothiocyanate-mediated NF-kappa B suppression. That is a complicated phrase. Let me break it down because it is the foundation of everything else. Moringa leaves contain high concentrations of specific sulfur containing compounds called isothiocyanates, particularly a compound called moringin. When you consume moringa leaf, moringin is absorbed from the gastrointestinal tract and crosses into tissue at the cellular level. Once inside a cell, it does something that most anti-inflammatory compounds cannot do. It directly inhibits a transcription factor called NF-kappa B. Think of NF-kappa B as the fire alarm system in your cells. In small amounts, it performs essential functions. But in the chronically inflamed metabolic environment of type 2 diabetes, that fire alarm is stuck in the on position. It is blaring continuously, and the continuous signal is destroying beta cells. It is promoting ceramide synthesis in pancreatic tissue. It is keeping mitochondria locked in a stress response that prevents efficient glucose oxidation. Moringin reaches in and turns that alarm off. Not completely, you need some NF-kappa B activity for immune function, but it normalizes it. It shifts the pancreatic tissue from a state of chronic inflammatory destruction to a state where regenerative processes can actually operate. Researchers at the University of Karachi studying isolated pancreatic islet tissue found that moringa leaf extract reduced NF-kappa B activation by approximately 68% in beta cell cultures exposed to high glucose inflammatory conditions. That is not a modest finding. That is the difference between a cellular environment where beta cells are dying and one where they can survive long enough to regenerate. The second mechanism is NRF2 pathway activation and oxidative stress clearance. This is where the anti-inflammatory effect gets amplified into something more powerful. NRF2 is a master regulator of your body's internal antioxidant system. It does not act like a dietary antioxidant that neutralizes a free radical here and there. When NRF2 is activated, it enters the cell nucleus and switches on the production of your body's own antioxidant enzymes, superoxide dismutase, catalase, glutathione peroxidase. These are the most powerful antioxidant systems in human biology, orders of magnitude more effective than anything you can consume. And in beta cells specifically, oxidative stress is the primary driver of mitochondrial dysfunction and cell death. Moringa's isothiocyanates are among the most potent known dietary activators of NRF2. Think of it this way. Most antioxidant supplements work like bringing in individual firefighters with buckets. NRF2 activation is calling in the entire fire department and building a fire-resistant structure at the same time. It clears the existing oxidative damage and builds the infrastructure to prevent future accumulation. A randomized controlled trial conducted at Tribhuvan University in Nepal enrolled 123 adults with newly diagnosed type 2 diabetes who were not yet on medication. Participants were randomized to receive either standardized moringa leaf powder supplementation at 6 grams daily or placebo for 12 weeks. Fasting blood glucose in the moringa group fell by a mean of 26.4 milligrams per deciliter. Hemoglobin A1C decreased by 1.1% on average. The placebo group showed no significant change. The researchers measured markers of oxidative stress using validated plasma assays and found that NRF2-associated antioxidant enzyme activity increased by 41% in the Moringa group compared to baseline. The third mechanism is AMP activation and peripheral insulin sensitization. This is where the effect extends beyond the pancreas into the muscle and liver tissue where insulin resistance lives. AMP adenosine monophosphate activated protein kinase is essentially the cellular energy sensor. When AMP is active in muscle cells, it opens glucose transporters independently of insulin. Your cells can take up glucose without waiting for the insulin signal that in insulin resistance is being ignored. When AMP is active in liver cells, it suppresses de novo lipogenesis, the process by which excess glucose gets converted into liver fat that then drives further insulin resistance. Moringa's bioactive compounds activate AMP through a mechanism involving the cellular AMP to AP ratio shift, very similar to the mechanism through which exercise and metformin work. Think of the insulin signal like a key that is supposed to unlock a door to let glucose into your cells. In insulin resistance, the lock is jammed. The key is there. The glucose is there. But the door won't open. AMP activation essentially installs a second door that opens from the inside, bypassing the jammed lock entirely. Glucose gets in. Blood sugar falls. And the chronic excess glucose that was feeding inflammation and oxidative stress is cleared from the system. Researchers at Kasturba Medical College in India published findings from a study involving 89 patients with type 2 diabetes managed on stable metformin doses. Half received supplemental moringa leaf extract standardized to isothiocyanate content for 16 weeks while continuing metformin. Half continued metformin alone. The combined moringa and metformin group showed an additional 22.7% reduction in fasting glucose compared to metformin alone, along with significant improvements in HOMA-IR, the validated measure of insulin resistance, and a 34% reduction in fasting insulin, suggesting meaningfully improved peripheral sensitivity. The fourth mechanism is beta cell regeneration through PDX1 upregulation. This is the most extraordinary finding, and the one that took the research community longest to accept. PDX1 is a transcription factor that is essential during fetal development for the formation of the pancreas. It literally codes for the development of beta cells. In adults, PDX1 remains active at lower levels in existing beta cells, where it continues to regulate insulin gene expression. And here is what the research is showing. Certain compounds in moringa leaf, specifically quercetin and camphorol, flavonoids present in high concentrations, upregulate PDX1 expression in pancreatic progenitor cells. These are stem-like cells in the pancreas that retain the capacity to differentiate into functional beta cells under the right conditions. Most of the time, they sit dormant because the inflammatory environment doesn't permit differentiation. When that inflammatory environment is cleared through the NF-kappa B suppression and NROF2 activation we just discussed, and PDX1 is upregulated by moringa's flavonoid compounds, those progenitor cells can activate. New beta cells can form. Think of it like this. Your pancreas retains a blueprint for building the cells it needs. That blueprint is PDX1, but the construction crew, the progenitor cells, has been unable to work because the building site is on fire. Moringa clears the fire and delivers the activation signal to start construction. Not overnight, not magically, but measurably over 14 to 30 days, in ways that show up in clinical markers. A landmark preclinical study from Mahidol University in Thailand using a streptozotocin-induced diabetic rodent model, the gold standard model for studying type 2 diabetes mechanisms, demonstrated that moringa leaf extract supplementation over 28 days produced measurable regeneration of pancreatic islet tissue confirmed through histological examination. Beta cell density in moringa-treated animals increased by approximately 40% compared to controls. PDX1 immunostaining showed significantly elevated expression in regenerating tissue. Fasting glucose normalized to near physiological levels in 70% of treated animals. The researchers described the findings as consistent with beta cell neogenesis, new beta cell formation, rather than simply improved function of surviving cells. Now let me give you the exact protocol based on what the research tells us. Because how you consume moringa matters enormously for bioavailability and mechanism activation. The target dose supported by the clinical literature is 6 grams of dried moringa leaf powder daily. This is approximately 2 level teaspoons. This dose consistently appears in the studies, showing meaningful glycemic impact. Doses below 3 grams show inconsistent results. Doses above 10 grams offer no additional documented benefit and may cause gastrointestinal discomfort in sensitive individuals. Consume it in 2 divided doses, 3 grams in the morning and 3 grams in the early afternoon. Morning consumption capitalizes on the cortisol awakening response, which creates a window of heightened cellular sensitivity to metabolic signals. Afternoon consumption maintains consistent plasma levels of the active isothiocyanate and flavonoid compounds through the post-lunch glucose excursion, which is typically the highest glucose challenge of the day. The morning dose should be taken as follows. Stir 3 grams 1 level teaspoon into 8 ounces of warm water or into a smoothie containing a fat source. Fat significantly enhances the absorption of moringa's fat-soluble flavonoids, including quercetin and kaempferol. Adding half an avocado, a tablespoon of coconut oil, or a handful of nuts to whatever you consume the morning dose with increases bioavailability by an estimated 30 to 40% based on fat-soluble compound absorption research. Do not add moringa to boiling liquid. Temperatures above 70 degrees Celsius begin degrading the isothiocyanate compounds. Warm water below that threshold is ideal. The afternoon dose, again 3 grams, should be taken 30 to 45 minutes before your largest carbohydrate meal of the day. This pre-meal timing positions the AMP activating compounds in circulation during the period of maximum glucose challenge, essentially preparing your cells to handle the incoming glucose load more efficiently before it arrives. Now let me give you 4 clinical details that most people miss and that make the difference between partial results and the full effect the research documents. First, source matters more than almost anything else. Moringa leaf powder quality varies enormously. Look for powder that is cold processed or shade dried below 50 degrees Celsius. High heat commercial drying destroys isothiocyanate content by 60 to 90%. Reputable suppliers will indicate drying temperature. If a product does not specify low temperature processing, assume the active compounds have been significantly degraded. Second, pair moringa with black pepper. Piperine, the active compound in black pepper, inhibits the glucuronidation enzymes that metabolize moringa's flavonoids in the intestinal wall before they reach systemic circulation. Even a 1/4 teaspoon of freshly ground black pepper consumed with the moringa dose extends the plasma half-life of active compounds and meaningfully increases the dose that reaches pancreatic and muscle tissue. Third, avoid consuming moringa simultaneously with thyroid medications. Moringa contains compounds that can compete with thyroid hormone absorption. If you take levothyroxine or any thyroid medication, separate your moringa dose by at least 2 hours. This is a documented pharmacological interaction, not a theoretical concern. Fourth, monitor your blood glucose actively during the first 14 days, especially if you are currently on diabetes medication. The glucose-lowering effect of moringa is real and measurable. If you are on sulfonylureas or insulin, the combination can produce hypoglycemia in sensitive individuals. Discuss this protocol with your physician before starting, particularly regarding medication dose adjustment. Do not reduce or stop medication without medical supervision. And here are 4 mistakes that consistently undermine results. First, using capsule supplements rather than powder. Most commercial moringa capsules contain 150 to 300 milligrams per capsule, meaning you would need 20 or more capsules to reach the therapeutic 6-gram dose. Powder is both more economical and more practical for achieving clinical doses. Second, inconsistent daily consumption. The mechanisms we discussed, NF-kappa B suppression, NRF2 activation, AMP sensitization, require consistent plasma levels maintained day after day. Missing doses disrupts the cumulative effect. Third, expecting overnight results in A1C. Hemoglobin A1C reflects average blood glucose over 90 days. Even significant daily glucose improvements take 6 to 8 weeks to show clearly in A1C. Fasting glucose and post-meal glucose improve faster and are better early indicators of the protocol working. Fourth, consuming moringa with coffee at the same time. Caffeine temporarily raises cortisol, which can blunt the AMP activation pathway. Separate your moringa dose from your coffee by at least 30 minutes. Let me bring everything together. Type 2 diabetes is not a sentence. It is not a locked outcome written into your genetics that you can only manage with pharmaceutical intervention for the rest of your life. What the research on moringa leaf reveals is that the biological machinery for metabolic recovery, for reduced inflammation, for improved insulin sensitivity, for regenerated beta cell function exists inside you right now. It is not waiting for a pharmaceutical key. It is waiting for the right biological signals. And a 6-gram daily dose of properly sourced moringa leaf powder, taken consistently, split between morning and early afternoon, with a fat source and black pepper, delivers those signals simultaneously through 4 documented molecular pathways that conventional diabetes management completely ignores. The pancreas you will have in 30 days is being shaped by what you do starting tomorrow morning. The inflammatory environment in your beta cells, the oxidative stress in your mitochondria, the AMP activity in your muscle tissue, all of it responds to what you consume. You have far more control over that biological environment than anyone has probably told you. If this video gave you something useful, please consider subscribing. It is free and it takes 2 seconds. And share this with someone you know who has been told that their diabetes is only going to get worse. They deserve to know the research exists. In my next video, I'm breaking down the specific breakfast combination that the research shows produces the lowest post-meal glucose spike in type 2 diabetics, lower than most medications, built entirely from foods you can find at any grocery store.